How is everybody doing? Strength Chat episode 136, and today I have got a very special guest for you. Today I'm joined by a biomechanics specialist and rehab specialist, the one and only David Gray. How are you doing?
I'm great, mate. Thank you very much for having me on. Episode 136, is it?
136.
Yeah, fair play to you. That's really good.
Yeah, I'm a stubborn person. I'll keep going through. Yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on the podcast. How's everything been going with you? What's been happening in your world recently?
It's been good, man. I'm just back from a few days off. We just a staycation. We went down to Kerry, so I'm in the southeast of Ireland. So we went over kind of southwest. Just for a couple of days in a hotel and a couple of days camping. Because I suppose maybe unlike many people, I've been really, really busy over lockdown since COVID came in. So I've done loads of kind of online webinars. I hosted some of those, and I've been working with online clients for a couple of years now. So that just got busier. That was like 70% of my business before this happened, and now obviously it went to 100%. So I got really, really busy, and luckily, because I know a lot of people were struggling on that side of things, and I hosted a webinar to show a lot of therapists and clinicians and just coaches how to do a lot of online work. So yeah, it's been good, but I needed that little break, so I'm kind of recharged and ready to go again.
Oh, nice. And are you back in sort of the clinic now then? Are you back in the gym now, or have you just kept everything online?
Still online for now. There is people in Ireland back seeing people in person, but two things. I don't really need to right now because I'm busy, and I'm kind of not. I'm not taking the chance either at the moment. I'm just kind of playing it by ear and seeing what happens. And you have to jump through a lot of hoops. There's a lot of paperwork and a lot of cleaning and stuff like that. And when I can do it online, and I think even my clients are happy to just keep going online for now. So I do miss the in-person stuff. I'm looking forward to getting back to it, and it's nice to have a mix of both. And I think if COVID has taught us anything, it's that you kind of need to, or maybe you need to have a little bit of a mix of both, because you probably can't rely on one or the other. So no, I'm looking forward to getting back to it, but not back just yet.
Yeah, I completely agree with it. Yeah, it's better to be safe than sorry. I know when the gym opened up, there was quite a lot of boxes that we had to tick to make sure that everything was good. But to be fair, quite a lot of my clients, exactly what you've said, they've maybe come into the gym for a little bit of a catch up, but some of them have been quite lucky that they've got garage gyms or can train outside a little bit. They're quite happy to keep with that until it's to a point where things are, I don't want to say normal, but as back to sort of regularity as we can. With the athletes that, quite a lot of the athletes that you're working with, getting back to actually playing games now. Then how has that been? Have there had any games yet?
It's good, yeah. Quite a few of them have been back playing. So like I've different basketballers kind of around Europe and in America, and then soccer players, and then just people in Ireland who are playing sports. So a lot of the games have come back. Not all of them now. I have people who are hopefully we're going to be going to the Olympics this year, and obviously that's been pushed back. Yeah. But the funny thing is, when they're working with me, usually they have a little bit of a niggle or something that they're trying to figure out. So COVID gave a lot of them a really good chance to kind of catch up, because obviously when you're a high level athlete, you just don't usually get that chance. Yeah. So it was, I think, for the athletes that used it to their opportunity and their advantage, athletes are selfish. Athletes are selfish, and they need to be selfish, and they saw it as a really good time and a really good chance to catch up. So that's cool. And now I think they're most of them are back now, and they're hitting it at the right time, I think.
Oh, good. Yeah, I think with COVID and everything, I don't think there's ever going to be a chunk of time like that people will be able to get again. Yeah, obviously, with seasons being put on pause and competitions cancelled and all that sort of stuff. But like what you said there about athletes being selfish, it is that time to come back a little bit fresher and maybe work on some things. And as well, it was quite interesting because obviously the rugby union season starts again this weekend. For a couple of sort of the older players, they were sort of coming out and saying on podcasts and a little bit that I've read that they'd never have that opportunity to feel fresh again, and have a sort of a mid-season break and go again. So yeah, I think there's a lot of positives that can be taken out of it as well.
Definitely, it's going to extend a couple of careers, I think, for an extra couple of years probably. And even
absolutely.
In Ireland, there's lads playing Gaelic football and hurling who, like, you might have had maybe 25 people up training before COVID, and then when we went back, there was like 35 or 40 people training. So lads were kind of coming out of the woodwork from everywhere because they're sick of sitting on their arse, you know. So everyone is looking to get going again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think quite a lot of people have said, especially when sort of you could go out for walks and that sort of stuff. I think everyone's just don't want to be inside anymore. Everyone wants to be getting out.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening who might not know your background from your own training and how you sort of got into sort of the rehab world and started working with the athletes and clients that you work with, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
Yeah, I'll give hopefully keep it short and sweet. Yeah, so basically I played a lot of sport all my life, Irish sports, Gaelic football and hurling. Now, did dabble a lot in like soccer and rugby and stuff like that, but those were my main sports, and those are the ones that Gaelic football, at least I tried to play at a pretty high level, but I just kept getting injured, to be honest, and had a lot of knee issues, a lot of hip issues, a lot of Achilles issues, and that kind of led me down the route to trying to, it was like a dissatisfaction with the treatments that I was being given and the help that I was receiving from just everyone really, and looking back now, some people were actually doing a pretty good job with me, but maybe I wasn't in a place to hear that at the time, or follow the advice or whatever it was. But that kind of, I just got into kind of trying to figure things out for myself a little bit, because I'd seen all the best people and the surgeons and the doctors and the physios and the best of the best, and it wasn't good enough for me. So it certainly didn't help me, and I was just in constant pain. So I just kind of decided to travel around the world and read a lot and study a lot, and went quite a unconventional route about it. I think most people probably they do their formal education first, and then they go and do the continuing education after that, and kind of find mentors and stuff after that. I kind of went the other way around it. I spent like 8 years or 7 or 8 years going to continuing education courses and picking up bits and pieces, and that was how I learned my anatomy, and that was how I learned, but it was a very practical way of learning. So it was really like, okay, like, what can I take from this course or from this person that I can apply into my body right now? And it was a very selfish journey. And then from there, just started, obviously I had to pick up a formal qualification after that, but it was still just like a 2-year course, just to have insurance to put hands on people. And from there, just started rumbling along, started working with just kind of everyday people, and then started picking up some more big profile names and stuff like that. And yeah, that's kind of where I am now. There's a mix of just everyday people, office workers, people like that, Gen Pop, and then athletes who are kind of average athletes, and then there's kind of sub-elite and elite athletes that I work with, and it's a nice mix of those, and I enjoy working with those different populations because it gives me a chance to learn from each of them, and it keeps you sharp, I think, as well. So that's where I am at the moment, and most of the work is online at the moment, and it's probably going to stay that way because it allows me to work with people from, like this morning I had a very good girl who's a weightlifter in Australia. She's going to be in the World Championships. I had a couple of athletes from America, and then a couple of guys in Ireland. So it's just a nice mix, and yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm very lucky to be where I'm at, and I've been I've just learned from a lot of really smart people, I think, along the way, and tried to bastardize their work and do a worse job than they do, but kind of filter things and make it into my own a little bit as well, you know.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and I think it's quite good, you know, that you mentioned there, because it's quite a wide variety of clients that you work with. Do you find that sometimes the work that you do with the athletes can carry over to the Gen Pop, and Gen Pop work carry over to athletes, you know, for problem solving?
Yeah, honestly, it's much more similar, I think, for me at least, than people usually think. So they think of like, all right, here's an Olympic sprinter, and here's someone who just wants to go for a run, just wants to be able to jog 2K without pain, and it's 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 honestly not that different. It's quite humbling some of the time to see how similar it can be, because from a biomechanics standpoint, like our joints can only move in certain ways, really. Now, maybe if you're a gymnast, you need to be able to access greater ranges of motion, but there is still only flexion, extension, rotation. There is still only these movements available at your femur and at your everything else. So we're just looking for the movements that they're missing. And then obviously it's about loading those movements quite heavy and quite hard. And the athletes are going to obviously have more load and more speed involved, and they're going to learn a lot quicker. So that's the biggest difference, is that their nervous system just sucks up information so quickly. So if I have someone, if they're working on a movement that they're maybe missing in their body, a Gen Pop person I might say, here's 2 weeks, I want you to go away and work on these 3 things, and then we'll chat again. Whereas if I have a professional athlete, it might be, okay, here's 3 things, we're going to work on this, and I will chat to you tomorrow because you will have nailed them then.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest difference, I think, how quickly they learn, and obviously the speed and load that they need to be able to get to. We need to try and replicate those speeds, those loads, those positions in the rehab process, because that's what they're going to experience. But at the end of the day, if a granny is walking down the stairs or falls off a curb, she needs to be able to create a certain amount of pre-tension. Her foot needs to be able to hit the floor. Her calf needs to be able to disperse force before it gets up to something like a knee or a hip. And that's the same as an athlete. It's the same movement. It's the same reflexes that are kicking in. It's just at a different speed and a different load, different velocity.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And when you're mentioning there about the biomechanics side of things, and the joints, that's an area that I know for me is probably one of my weaker points, and is something that I always have to refer back to. But when you have a good understanding of that, then you can relate it a little bit more to the different clientele that you're working with. Obviously, you mentioned about having a few different mentors and influences. Who have sort of been your biggest mentors or influences that you've had, or has that swapped and changed throughout your career?
It has swapped and changed, and probably always will. But there is then big people who have had a big influence on me over the years. But just from a biomechanics standpoint, there's probably no one better than Gary Ward, I think, from Anatomy in Motion. He has kind of created something called a flow motion model, which is basically a way of looking at gait and being able to look at every phase in the gait cycle and say, here's what the joints should be doing. And it's a model of movement. And I think for us to have models of movement in our mind, it's important. Now, everyone is not going to fit that model, but if we don't have a model that we're trying to push people towards, then it's a mess. It's a free-for-all. So there is a model in my mind when I look at someone moving and thinking, okay, ideally, that knee will be doing this then, and that hip will be doing that then. And now there is a bandwidth, there is a self-organization, and there is structural differences, and all these things that are saying that no one is going to fit perfectly into any model, and all models are wrong. But at least having a model there that we can try to push people towards, I think that's very valuable and useful for me. So Gary's been a big influence with that. And now that's walking gait, and it's not necessarily running, but similar joint actions are going to happen in both. It's just things like maybe the heel isn't going to hit the floor, but we're still going to land more supinated and maybe pronate and maybe resupinate back out. Then from a kind of movement standpoint, Ido Portal, a guy called Ido Portal, had a big influence on me. Kind of when I was starting out, I don't really use any of his stuff now, but I went quite deep down the rabbit hole, and he's just kind of like a movement trainer as such. But he had a big influence on me in terms of a mindset shift a little bit, in terms of everything doesn't have to be squats and deadlifts, and there's options out there, and we can get people moving in different ways. And that's not to say in any way that we need to take away squats and deadlifts or traditional strength training, but there is options out there, and there's things that can help people feel good while they're doing that other stuff as well. So he definitely opened my mind there. And if you see some of the people that he trains, they get to ridiculous levels of doing ridiculous things, but they're generalists. They're not specialists. They're not going and throwing a baseball or anything like that. So it's just trying to take the best bits from him and from everyone else. So he's been a big influence. A guy called Dave O'Sullivan, who's not far from you.
Yeah.
He's in Huddersfield. He's been a big influence on me. He's a physio. He's a really good guy, I think. And he's influenced me a lot. Definitely on the kind of communication side of things with clients, and helping them understand what the plan is and how to speak to them and stuff like that. So he's been a very big influence. And then probably Posture Restoration Institute for the breathing side of things have helped me quite a bit. And then just anyone with a Soviet last name, any books or anything like that from over the years that I could get my hands on, Verkhoshansky and people like that with regards to the plyometrics and stuff. So I've just kind of taken all these bits and pieces and hopefully put it into something that's valuable to me.
Yeah, I like to ask that question just because I know for some people, and when you say that there wasn't just one, that it is okay to pick from all these different people and put your own spin on it. And there's some people that I still refer back to, and then start looking at other things and picking and choosing. So yeah, and some of the names there that I've heard of, and I'd look at their work as well. And sometimes it's just a case of just makes you think about it a little bit different, which I find quite interesting.
Exactly.
The main sort of diving into sort of the topic of what I wanted to sort of pick your brains and chat with you a little bit about is obviously you mentioned there about walking and gait, and a lot of some of the work that you've spoken on is obviously feet. And this has been sort of like a hot topic with the coaches that I've been working about as well. And a lot of people start speaking about sort of foot health and looking after your feet. What does that actually mean? What's the starting point with that? Because I know sometimes that you can look at people squat or look at certain things and never look down. Just have a look at what are the knees doing, what are the shoulders doing. So can you just sort of explain to you or what foot health is to you?
Foot health, it's a tough question because it's no different probably to any other part of the body, and health for any other part of the body usually means having a little bit of variability there. So it means being able to take your joints through a range of motion and have control over that range of motion, and not being too stuck in one movement or the other movement or limited. So I think that's probably what health means for any joint. So that maybe is what it means. That's kind of what it means to me, and maybe not doing too much and not doing too little. So with regards to the foot, then it's the same thing, but I think people just don't understand the foot. So they talk about foot health, but they're talking crap, to be honest, a lot of the time, because they actually don't know how it should move or how it does move, and the movements that it has access to. So to understand that, to talk about foot health, we kind of need to understand the movements that it needs to be able to access, when it needs to be able to access them, and how much is too much and how much is too little. So that's a tricky topic maybe for a podcast, because these are visual things a lot of the time. But we can just say that when I walk, I'm going to heel strike in gait, and my heel is going to hit the floor. It's going to be in a little bit more of a supinated position, which is kind of the arches. The foot is a bit more rigid. The arches are a little bit higher. Then as I roll through, it's going to pronate. So my foot is going to flatten down into the floor. And then as I push off, it's going to become more rigid again and kind of lock up. And it gives me a stable base to push off of. So the foot can only do two things, and that's pronate and supinate. So typically, though, when we go into the gym, we don't train the pronation side of things at all, or traditionally at least. We'll always train the supination side of things, feet, our knees pushing out, weight more on the outside of the foot. And that's seen as good. And then the other side of the coin is seen as bad. But we know that variability is important, and every movement there's a continuum, there's up and down, there's left and right. So we need to be able to access these things. So that, to me, that's foot health. And it's not that squatting with knees out is bad or anything like that. It's just our knees in is bad. It's just that, have you pushed too far in one direction and lost that? Now, we're probably talking about, or I'm talking about the gym there, but really the gym is quite a new phenomenon. It's couple of hundred years old maybe. Whereas human beings have been, or whatever, animals have been walking for millions of years. Our locomotion has been around forever. So our foot really, if you want to think about 15, 20,000 steps a day, is where we probably came from, with no shoes on, and every single step you've ever taken then would have been different because the ground was not paved. So every twig, every branch, every bush, every mound of clay that you step on is going to be different. So that foot is going through a lot of range of motion, and it needs to be able to access that. And that's what we're missing now a lot of the time. Every step that people have ever taken from being a child, they've been in a pair of shoes which are cushioned. They're if you live in the city, you're definitely walking on just on concrete flat floors, and you're not experiencing those movements. And there's 33 joints in the foot. So meaning there's 66 joints total between both feet. That is a hell of a lot of joints. So people talk a lot about range of motion and stretching and flexibility and being able to do the splits and being able to do a back bend and things like that. And really, if you want to talk about flexibility and range of motion and want to say that it's important, then that means it's important everywhere and not just some places. And that's what people miss, in my opinion. So that's why the feet are so important. And if they're not moving well, they're the only things to touch the floor, you're gonna struggle with all your other joints, in my opinion.
Yeah, I thought that was quite a good explanation. And the first point that you said there, that people won't look at their feet because they might not understand it as well. And, that's why I wanted to have you on as a guest and speak about that. And you mentioned there about, gym's relatively a new thing, but in terms of walking and looking at people walking and looking at their feet, would that be the first thing that you do, regardless of, whether they're playing Gaelic football or rugby, or, whether they're like the weightlifters that you're working with? And what would what would be something good that you're looking for, and what is it would be giving you signals of, right, okay, there's something that we need to work on there?
Yeah. So just for instance, with an online client, let's just say they have not a shoulder issue or a neck issue, but something else, maybe a back, hips, anything really. Now, actually, regardless, I'll look at gait. So I'll get them to send me a walking video. I'll get them to send me a video of a squat. I'll get them to send me a video of a toe touch, and I'll get them to send me a video of a nice narrow squat where they do a toe touch, and then they, with their hands staying down, they drop into a squat from there. And those, and maybe then a rotation, just standing, twisting left and right, and a lateral flexion, so a side bend left and right. And those movements that we see, so a toe touch, rotation and extension, those movements that we look at in clinic maybe, or on the gym floor with people, what you're seeing there is a reflection of gait. So you don't actually need to look at someone walking to understand how they move when they walk. Yeah. So if I ask someone to bend down and touch their toes and they don't flex their spine at all, then I can pretty safely presume that they don't flex their spine when they walk. So you just have to tick the boxes. So when does flexion of the spine happen? It happens in heel strike. So I'm going to swing my left leg forward, my heel is going to hit the floor, and that kind of swing leg is going to get the pelvis to tuck under for me. Ribs are going to drop down, and that'll be a nice flexion through the spine. And it won't be like anything huge, but it will just be a nice even curve through the spine. So if someone can't touch their toes, or maybe they can touch their toes, but it's a hinge, it's all hamstrings and not actually a flexion, then I know they probably can't heel strike very well in gait. So that's just a representation of like how we can break down these movements. If I get someone to stand up facing me and they rotate left, they rotate right, and actually they can't rotate left at all, or their pelvis doesn't really go there, then I know that when they're supposed to be resupinating back out, pushing off that left foot, and the pelvis should be rotating to the left, or maybe just before that, maybe mid stance. They're probably not going to be able to do that, because if they can't do it in a standing environment, then they definitely can't do it in a dynamic environment. So we can look at these simple things in that the assessments that people look at anyway, but I think a lot of people are looking at them, but they don't understand what they're seeing. So they're seeing people move and they're saying, well, you have tight hamstrings, but actually, no, that's probably not the case. There's a reason for these things, and that's how I relate it back to gait. And that's how I teach a lot of people. If I'm kind of teaching other people how to look at gait, I'll teach them how to look at it, just breaking down those movements. And then as they get better, we can start to look at walking gait and running gait, and you'll easily pick out the things that they can't do. And all you're trying to do is plug them back into the body. So if someone can't access lateral flexion or posterior tilt, we just want to make an environment, or give them an environment where they can experience that movement. And then if we've done it well enough, when they go and walk and run, they will do it, and it won't be cued. That it'll just happen because the brain now feels that movement and is able to access it.
So is that the starting point for the program or the template that we start working with them? And what sort of like what you mentioned there about the pronation, supination, and looking at all different movements. How are you looking to sort of address that when you actually start working with the clients?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because everyone is different, and someone might not be able to supinate their foot, so they have a flat foot, and they might not be able to kind of come back out of that. And it's not that a flat foot is bad; it's just that it needs to be able to resupinate back out. But for one person who can't do that, they could have hurt their big toe when they were 6, and because the big toe can't extend, then the arch can't lift up again. So I literally have a video of a guy on my Instagram page who broke his toe, and he couldn't supinate his foot at all, meaning he couldn't rotate that hip to that. He couldn't get rotation through that hip either, because they kind of happened at the same time. So just did some mobilizations on his big toe, and suddenly his hip was able to rotate again. So that's an example of a very local problem at the foot. But then we have maybe if someone's ribs are very flared and their pelvis is in a big anterior tilt, then and this is, it depends, but some of the time their body weight is going to push forward. Well, actually, sorry, the body weight is almost always going to push forward. Their center of mass is going to come forward on their feet, and when center of mass starts to come forward, some of the time the feet will just flatten down into the floor, because the weight isn't in the heels anymore. It's more forward on the midfoot, and that's going to flatten the foot. So to get that person back into that supinated position, I'm going to probably have to address the rib cage and the pelvis. So it's looking at the person as an individual and seeing what's missing. And a lot of the time it goes back to their injury history, and obviously their movement habits, what they've been training, what they've been doing, or maybe not doing.
Yeah, with just touching on that, because obviously everyone is different when they come and start training, and some people can come in and I've just got really naturally good movement, and some people might have a little bit of previous injury history, or people might just come in and might just not have those. I don't know if firing patterns is the right word, but not just be able to make their movement a little bit more fluid. When it comes to, like what you mentioned there about the big toe, whether that may be a previous injury, or do you find that some people, in terms of foot health and their gait, that they just naturally have no issues, and then you've got to just look at other things? Or do you find that sometimes, because I know, there's that there's the topic of barefoot running versus trainers running, or do you find that it can be a build up of the shoes that they're wearing, or what they're doing when they're in the gym?
It's rarely one thing. Just like any issue or injury, it's probably rarely one thing. And like sometimes the narrative there is that barefoot, if you just go barefoot, you're fine, you're better. And I really couldn't, I disagree with that a lot of the time. There's absolutely nothing wrong with wearing a pair of shoes, and the human body is very robust and very adaptable, and we can wear shoes. We can definitely wear shoes. Now, some of the shoes that people wear are a little bit silly, you see nowadays, but still, there's no reason why they should necessarily cause pain. It's more about, and even the barefoot movement, they don't, a lot of the time, they don't actually address how the foot moves. They just say, take off your shoes. And I see that making people worse a lot of the time. It's, it's taking away maybe some support that they've always had. And that might work for someone, but there's definitely a lot more injuries from people going barefoot and going running barefoot than the opposite. So I've never, I don't think I've ever told, actually, I did tell one guy today to run barefoot. I'm making a liar of myself, but he actually said he went running barefoot, just playing frisbee in the park, and it actually felt really, really good for him, and his foot felt a bit better. So I said, right, keep doing that then. So it's, some people just move well. Yeah, some people come into the gym and they just move well, and they have everything in order, and we can just load the crap out of them. In my world, that's not really, I don't see a whole lot of that. Because people are coming usually with issues, and a lot of the time these issues are just a combination of poor loading, so too much loading, plus poor mechanics, plus poor recovery, and that's a cocktail for disaster, really, isn't it? So some people will only address the loading, so they'll just say make that local tissue stronger. So I have no problem with that. Some people will say just change the volume of what you're doing, and some people will change the mechanics. And I like to sit on the fence and address all of these things and try and make the foot move better, make the knee better, make the hamstring stronger, the calf stronger, and make sure that the volume and the recovery is all on point. And if we can tick all those boxes, then who knows what helped the most. We don't know, and I don't really care. I look at my KPIs and I look at, from the first session, here's what we did, and I always have KPIs that I'm rechecking back against. But at the end of the day, I want to bring as many things to the party. Now, maybe I'll only introduce them one at a time, so I have an idea of what's having the biggest impact. But at the end of the day, if I can get someone back, and if it's by doing a calf raise or if it's by doing foot mobility work, I don't care which it is. I try not to have a bias with that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it, because I know sometimes it's right. I'm going to put we're going to try this method and we're going to put all out on this one, which I've had that mentality before. We're just going to do this. That not works, right? We're going to do everything, but yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. Having that checklist and think, right, we're going to add all these in, and ultimately, whether it's a client or an athlete, the end result is, right, are they out of pain and they can actually do what they need to do on the performance side of things. Just touching on the shoe side of things, do you think sometimes when coaches actually just blame the shoe, because sometimes I've had clients before that have had specially made shoes or have had insoles or anything like that, do you think that just masks the problem and sometimes, or the issue that they might have, and is sometimes an easy cop out rather than actually like, right, what's happening with the ankle? Is it the calf or anything like that?
Yeah, I think it's a cop out. I think it's a cop out a lot of the time. I think it's very similar to a clinician saying, go for a scan. So that scan, a lot of the time, you pretty much know. Now maybe there's a red flag. Maybe they need to go for a scan. But a lot of this, so someone has back pain and they say, Jesus, they've tried a few sessions and I've rubbed them and I've dry needled them and I've given them a Stuart McGill big 3, right? And none of them have helped. So I'm going to say, go for a scan. That's a cop out. That's saying you don't know what's wrong. And there's no problem. I have no problem with someone admitting that they don't know what's wrong, but it is a lot of the time a cop out. And I would just prefer that they referred it to someone else who they thought had a better idea, because a lot of these scans are obviously giving people bad ideas because they are probably going to find something. Now, that is presuming that there isn't actually any red flags or any reason to send them. And I think the orthotic is the same, the shoe is the same a lot of the time. People don't know how to address the foot. They don't know how to make it move better. And what they're going to do is say they're going to give either an orthotic or tell them to change their shoes. And actually, they will probably change something. They definitely will change something. But that doesn't mean that's a good thing. That maybe your foot pain goes away and 3 weeks later you get knee pain. And I see that all the time. It's constant. I hear that almost every day from someone. That foot, they kind of brace that foot up, stop it from moving, and then those 33 joints, all that vibration that's coming up into the body when our foot hits the floor. Now the orthotic has stopped that some of the time. The shoe maybe has stopped that, and now the next joint up is taking the brunt of it. So I think we have to be careful with our prescription of these things. And I have nothing against orthotics. I think there's some people out there that are doing an amazing job with their orthotics, and they're based off like clinical tests and clinical reasoning. But then other people are just throwing orthotics or shoes at everything. And they wouldn't do that with a shoulder. They wouldn't do that, hopefully, with a hip. So I don't understand why they would do that with a foot.
Yeah, it does come back to that, the very first point that, it might not be as understood as fully. So, you kind of mask one problem and, trying to put a plaster over a leaking hole, if you like, and then another one's going to pop out. Whereas, sometimes just having a little bit of a fact-finding mission, and the exercises that you mentioned there, and looking at the movement and trying to figure out and work backwards and have a look what they're doing. Obviously, we had a look we touched a little bit on, you want to make sure that once you've worked with your client, whatever the boxes that you've ticked to get them to work on performance, I kind of want you to touch on once you've maybe addressed foot health or worked on a little bit of more mobility, how can that impact someone's performance, whether that be coming back from an injury or just including that in training to help them improve. And from a performance standpoint, how could it maybe, if you're not looking after your feet, how that can maybe negatively impact performance and have an effect further up the chain?
Yeah. So the feet are huge for me. Like I work with a lot of people with knee pain, and what I'm seeing a lot of the time is that they're tapping into the knee, they're sinking into the knee because they can't create stiffness at the foot and the ankle and the Achilles, and there's a lot of movement happening and loading happening through the knee, and when the foot hits the floor. So number one thing for me there with a lot of knee pain clients is what's happening when that foot hits the floor. Can it absorb some force? Can I use that foot? Can I use that Achilles tendon to do their job, to stop the force dispersing up, or to disperse the force coming up into the body? And I think we're going to see, and it's obviously hard to measure this stuff, but I think we're going to see a lot more studies like that coming out. And I think there's hints of stuff like that where they've looked at people with like athletic groin pain and anterior hip pain, stuff like that. Osteitis pubis, maybe, things like that. And what they're seeing is that, yes, they're strengthening that area around the hip, but actually with the biomechanical analysis, what they're actually seeing is as their symptoms improve, as the hip starts to feel better, what they're seeing is that not that the hip muscles are actually doing more work now, but actually that the ankle, the foot, and the Achilles is doing way more work, and it's taking the stress off the hip that was probably overstressed in the first place. Yeah. So for most people, they have like, especially if they've had problems for a while, like they will have done all the squats, they will have done all the deadlifts. What's the big missing piece here? It's the thing that hits the floor and the thing that's not able to create shapes and create stiffness and be strong and transfer forces around the body and disperse some of that force. So the foot is huge there. I had a girl, a camogie player in Ireland. She's basically hurling for the women, and she's a very good player, but she's had Achilles issues for a couple of years, and we just see that there's a complete lack of movement around the calcaneus, so the heel bone. So if someone had a hip flexor problem, you would look at the movement of the hip. You wouldn't just say that hip flexor is weak. Now, it might be weak, but you would check flexion, extension, rotation, adduction, abduction of that hip. And you would make sure that it had decent passive range of motion and active range of motion. And then when I look at this girl with her Achilles problem, I ask her to bend her knee, and her heel just does not move, not at all. And so where is that Achilles running into? What is it becoming? It's becoming the heel bone. So why wouldn't all these physios from the last 3 years with her have ever checked the passive range of motion at that bone and that joint around there? and there is very little. So it comes back to, again, people won't address the foot because they don't know what to do about it. And all I did with her was make sure your heel stays on the floor. I'm going to pop a sock in under the arch of your foot, and as you bend your knee, you're going to let that arch drop down. The heel has to stay down, and the heel is just going to roll into the inside a little bit. And then as you bring your weight back out, that heel is going to kind of tuck back in underneath. There's going to be a nice strong arch there, and we're just going to mobilize in and out of that. And that's like, her Achilles felt amazing after that. And yeah, it's warmed up, obviously, but we just introduced like movement into at least 20 more joints in the foot than what she usually gets. So these are things that I have another guy, an Achilles guy at the moment, and he does his gym program, but I get him to pronate his foot 100 times a day. And if he doesn't do that, his Achilles doesn't feel good. So he just does that every day, 100 times a day at least. And his Achilles, after 5 years of Achilles problems, is starting to go away. So to me, that is pain and performance. It's bringing things to the party that are missing, and not always just blaming it on a strength issue, you know?
Yeah. So obviously, looking on that and saying that they're not going to look with the amount of joints that's in the foot and in the ankle. I think there's a lot more information coming out on that. But are the exercises, activate the arch in the foot or increasing a little bit of mobility? Is it trial and error, playing around with certain exercises? Because some people might say, raise their heel if they're squatting or anything like that. Or is there some go-to exercises like what you mentioned there that you would implement a little bit?
Tricky one. A little bit of both, maybe. A little bit of both. So it comes back to an assessment with a client. So I look at her when we remember that gait, right? Remember, foot can only do two things. So can it pronate? Can it supinate? And the pronation is the 33 joints all together need to do a certain thing so that the foot goes into a full pronated shape. So all those joints are moving in a way that they create that full shape. And then the supination is the exact same. So the question then becomes, can that girl earlier pronate, and can she supinate? So just bend your knee and let me see what happens with the foot. And the answer was kind of no to both of those, because there was such little movement at the foot that she's probably not. There is a little bit of pronation, but she's not pronating, and there's a little bit of supination, like it's very small range that she's moving through, and the rest of it looks like it's just Achilles that's being tugged on all the time. So there's no exercise as such in that like it's very, very simple. It's like I just put the sock in there and got her to feel that movement happening. And then when she went for a walk, it felt so much different for her. So her foot was doing different things. So that, I don't know what I call that, an exercise, just a simple movement. But then when we take that into the gym with us, so I can get someone to do a squat and I can change how they squat. So yes, if I want someone to strengthen the foot a little bit, then I might take the heel off and have the front half of the foot on a weight plate, and the heel is elevated off completely, and that's gonna drive activity into the arch of the foot, the transverse arch, the calf, the Achilles, these things. Whereas if I think someone has maybe more of a proximal hamstring, pelvis, rib cage issue, then I'm probably going to put their heel on the floor and make sure that more of the weight stays in the heel, because that heel striking gait will be more kind of tucking of the pelvis and the ribs staying down. So it's kind of identifying where they're missing. But either way, when they bend their knee, the knee is going to be going towards the big toe and not towards the little toe. So that dorsiflexion is going to the knee is going to come forward and go into a more pronated position. I don't mean like knees touching each other. Like people are probably like, I don't know, tearing their hair out when they hear me say knee towards the big toe. It's just in a little bit, because that's how the ankle joint moves. It's dorsiflexion and pronation. So and then as we come out, it's going to go out towards the little toe a little bit more as we kind of start to straighten the knee. So those are simple ways to start to experience those movements. And even in just like a regular back squat or a front squat, as people go down into hip flexion, I like them to feel their heels more. And as they come up, I like them to just hip extend and feel like they finish on their midfoot rather than staying on the heel all the time. So it's not that there's specific exercises, it's just tweaks to the exercises that we're already doing. And people get way more out of them. And I think in over 6 months or 12 months, we're increasing movement rather than decreasing movement all the time. So I'm getting people stronger and their feet are moving better and their knees and their hips. And we're not getting stronger at the expense of losing movement around the joints.
Yeah. The one thing that you touched on there is obviously you said quite a lot about feeling the movement, feeling a little bit better. And one thing that I wanted to touch on is the activation type of things, because the bigger thing is like what you mentioned about the woman that put the sock underneath the foot, went off running, and it felt a lot better. Are activations can they be sort of withdrawn a little bit, and it becomes you want that pattern to be sort of ingrained a little bit more, so they're not relying on them, and just use them as things to start off and then go and then actually trial it out and run and see how it feels, or all those activations going to be always there sort of in the background?
Ideally, like ideal world, you start to train these movement patterns, and then we don't really need to train them that much anymore. So I really don't want a client having to do these things all the time, forever and ever and ever. Just like I do a lot of breathing work with my clients. I don't want them always have to lie down and do a breathing exercise on their back before they do a squat. But at the start, if we first start, we probably have to do that. So that word is important, that feeling. So I want them to feel what I want, not even consciously, just unconsciously. I want their brain to experience that movement, their nervous system to experience that. And it's much easier then for us to take that with us into a squat or into a lunge or into running then, if our brain has experienced it, if it's felt good, and if it feels like it's worthwhile. So unfortunately, we have a world of people who will cue too much, I think. So instead of getting someone to feel a movement and experience the movement and sense it and kind of try and make sense of that movement, we're cueing them way too much, and we're giving them a million different cues, and we're like even so much so that people are telling people how to walk and how to run. So when you walk, you need to do this with your shoulder blades. Squeeze your shoulder blades back, keep your chest up, make sure your knee doesn't go towards the big toe. And that, I think that's a massive slap in the face to like millions of years of evolution that have made my body into a way that is hopefully going to be efficient, and my nervous system knows how to get around. It understands the end goal. The neurology of movement is basically, I have an intention, I want to go over there, or I want to pick up that pen, and my nervous system is going to organize my joints around how to do that. So it's not a perfect system, because it's just going to find out how to do it safely. So yes, we might need to plug in movements that it's maybe missing or hasn't been using for a while, maybe because of injury. But when I go and actually walk or run, then I'm not going to keep that cue. I'm hopefully going to let them do it, relax, do whatever you need to do, and it's going to just happen for me anyway. So there's no way in hell I need to tell someone, squeeze your glutes when you run or pronate your foot when you walk. It just should happen if I've trained it naturally. So yeah, that's kind of how I look at it. Activations are just ways to, and activation, I probably wouldn't call them activation, just movements like that are ways to experience it, and we'll work on that for as long as we need to work on it, and then we'll progress on to the next thing. But if we've done it well, we hopefully don't have to do it forever.
Yeah, I think that's. I'm quite glad you mentioned it on there, because a couple of phrases on there of trying to make it efficient and not having those reminders all the time. A prime example was I had a client yesterday, and we changed around their warm up a little bit, just because the activations or movements that I'd added in. they were just commonplace. They were just sort of, she wasn't really getting the benefit out of it. So just to change things around a little bit, and exactly what you said, move on to the next block is a good progression. And looking at it, because especially with movement, once it becomes once it's sort of ingrained a little bit, the activations or things that you're trying to do to switch that on aren't really needed anymore. So then in terms of an actual programming side of things, you're just wasting time rather than, you know, addressing some other things. So quite a lot of topics covered there, and I know I've got a little bit more of an insight into their foot, so that's given me a little bit more food for thought to go away and think about. But the last question, if you like, whether from a coach's point of view or if an athlete or a client is struggling with the feet, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom or take-home points with regards to the feet. Well, the first thing, just in general, with regards to everything, is do a little bit of a analysis on where you're at. So we have to, especially when you're looking at yourself, you get very emotional with your own body. So we get very emotional, we get caught up in it. That's why, like, I can't program for myself, or you probably can't program for yourself or anything like that, because we get emotional about things. So if you are talking about it or looking at it for yourself, you need to sit back and try and take the emotion out of it and actually understand, right, here's where I'm at, and and trying to understand why I got there or how I got there. And I would stress that how you got there is it's important to recognize any of the significant events that ever happened with your body. So anything that, even if you feel maybe isn't significant, your brain probably thinks it is very significant. So every injury or issue has been an insult to your nervous system, and your nervous system is going to compensate to avoid that area or loading that movement. And even if you think you've rehabbed it well, you probably haven't. Your nervous system still doesn't trust it. So understanding that, and understanding that where you have the pain usually actually isn't the problem, it's another area, and that area is compensating away from it. Now, compensation is a very, very, very good thing. It's a really important thing. If we didn't have compensation, if we weren't able to compensate, then we wouldn't be able to do anything. So it only becomes an issue when I'm compensating away from my right knee, and now I'm loading my left foot more, and now I have plantar fasciitis on my left foot, and now I try and move away from that, and now I'm loading through my back more, and now my back is sore. And now I have like 3 areas that I'm trying to, my brain is unconsciously trying to avoid, and that's what becomes really an issue. So I would sit down, write down my injury history, look at a lot of my movement habits and see what I can try and change. So it might be just as simple as, yeah, I'm going to go for a walk every day, but I'm going to try and walk on the grass. I'm going to try and do a little walk, maybe barefoot on a different terrain. It might be as simple as, I'm going to actually question what I've always been told around knees coming in towards my big toe is a bad thing. So I'm going to question that. And I'm going to say, well, if evolution, if my body didn't want my knee to come in towards my big toe, if it wasn't a valuable movement for us, it wouldn't be able to do that at all. So I'm going to start to experience that movement, let my knee come in, let my knee come out. I'm going to question the shoes that I'm wearing, all these things. And I'm going to get a coach who maybe doesn't force me into things that don't feel so good in the long term. So yeah, it's probably a generic thing, but start to question things and think a little bit more critically about what we're being told. And I think that's slowly dribbling into the industry. And not that I'm right in any way, it's just that I just want people to be able to think critically about things, and they can make up their own minds then.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. I think, everyone as coaches, everyone's always still learning. I don't think there's a definite way of doing things. I think there's a better way of doing things. Absolutely, to head people in the right direction. But yeah, it doesn't have to be. What I quite like there is that sometimes, looking back over your injury history, it could be something quite simple. So I know, from the work that Stuart Professor Stuart McGill and Joel Proskowitz about lower back. It's kind of, little things, if you're bending down and tying your shoelaces, or all those little things will add up, and it might be those small little changes that actually, all of a sudden have a really big impact on how you train, how you're feeling. So I think that is instead of just going to people and, like what we touched on in the main part of the chat there, of, oh well, it must just be my shoes, so I'm just going to think it's that. Whereas actually, right, what's the actually underlying issue? I thought that was a good point to finish on. Quite a lot of topics spoken about, and quite a bit of depth in there. For anyone who might have any questions about anything that we've chatted about today, or want to have a look at the content that you put out there, or maybe getting involved in any to work with you, where can people find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, the best place usually is Instagram. It's kind of the most accessible, I think, in terms of just like having a look at some of this stuff and deciding for yourself if you're interested or not. So David Gray Rehab is the Instagram account, so GREY Rehab, and the website is the exact same. I have a lower body basics program that's out at the moment, which is it's quite a cheap program. It's a generic program, and it's basically everything from the pelvis down, so pelvis, knees, feet, calves, hamstrings, glutes, quads, all this stuff. And it's just a home program basically that I built when COVID was on. And over 12 or 1,300 people have done it now in the last maybe just under 3 months. And it's kind of opened a lot of people's eyes, I think, to a lot of things that we can do to make ourselves feel really, really good and really, really strong. And we don't really need much weights for. And people sometimes will laugh. Like I get quite a few messages from like pretty high level athletes or very strong people, and they're like, I thought when you were saying I was going to be humbled by this stuff, I didn't think so. I thought you meant like my granny would struggle with this stuff, but they really struggle. And I call these the basics, because these are the things that I want every single one of my clients. When someone books in, I'm like, I wish they could do all this stuff so that they can feel and move and get their results a lot quicker. So I might probably sound like I'm trying to really plug that, but that's just a program that I have out that but you'll see a lot of that stuff on my Instagram anyway. It's just basic things that I think people should be able to do, but most people can't.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm actually looking at your website. Had a look at that as well, and for everyone listening, on David's Instagram and website, 100% have a look at that, because there is some really good content on there, and some exercises that you think, that should be. When you mentioned about humbling, you think, oh, that's all right, but it actually makes you think a little bit more. So thanks a lot for taking the time to chat with me, David. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to jump on the podcast. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.